I'm not totally sure if my father will ever forgive me for all the times I put empty boxes back on the shelf when I was a kid, but I'd like to think he has by now. Forgive Me Father 2 is the follow-up to 2022's original, but does it offer up even more visceral FPS carnage, or is it too early even for early access? Let's find out, but before that, I will forgive you if you haven't yet checked out our Patreon. Be sure to head on over to patreon.com/idreamofindiegames to support independent content. You'll gain Discord access, exclusive live streams, a new exclusive podcast, ad-free early shows, and more. Your community is waiting. I really enjoyed what I played of the original Forgive Me Father. The Lovecraftian art direction, solid first-person shooting mechanics, and great level design had me hooked. While I never finished the game and always meant to get back to it, I thought I would have a significant amount of time before a sequel was produced if it ever was. But here we are with Forgive Me Father 2 now hitting early access in an incredibly short span of time. Don't let the quick development cycle fool you, however, as this violent shooter is off to a really great start. I've never been much for competitive FPS games, so one thing I loved about Forgive Me Father was its strong emphasis on the single-player campaign. This remains the bread and butter of Forgive Me Father 2, which is broken up into various levels along with a hub area where you'll upgrade your character's weapons or add tomes that grant various perks. It's a simple loop, and yes, the early access version is perhaps a bit bare bones in spots, but the core mechanics remain just as engaging as ever, with an amazing comic book art style that is just as compelling now as it was when the original dropped. Here you'll play as the same priest from the original game, however, you won't really get much out of Forgive Me Father 2 in terms of narrative. As you complete levels, you'll unlock new notes that ever so slightly clue you in as to what has transpired, but overall, the story still feels very much like a work in progress and has a long ways to go before it offers any sort of interesting reason as to why you are on a murderous spree slaying monsters. The developers are aiming for a 2024 release for this title into version 1.0, but do mention they might not hit that target, so of course there's plenty of time to develop a more fleshed out tale. As of now, you simply won't find all that much to grasp onto story-wise. With the early access version, players will be able to blast through 10 levels in total. Most of these areas are bleak in tone and swarming with monsters, from a shipyard where you'll hop about boats and buildings to haunting cathedrals. The level design is mostly well done, though I will admit some areas are better than others. The bunker level in particular had me getting lost on a few occasions. However, keep in mind I tend to be a bit directionally challenged and can get lost in my own backyard, so it could be a me problem. Most levels felt fairly linear and had a well-defined path to follow with a spattering of secrets that are pretty tricky to discover. Luckily, you'll be notified which secrets you've missed and how many enemies you've slaughtered upon completion of a level. You can also jump back in at any time and visit old levels again through the main hub. While the level design wasn't always 100% perfect, the mechanics of Forgive Me Father 2 are excellent. Your best approach is going to be going out guns blazing, as carefully aiming down the sights or timing shots with exact precision isn't exactly where this game excels. This is an old school shooter at its core, where blasting foes in the face utilizing weapons ranging from shotguns to grenade launchers will often produce satisfying results. Players have a set health bar and armor pickups throughout levels that will help you to be able to absorb additional hits. The game also features what I suppose you could describe as light puzzles, but these mainly involve throwing switches to progress forward, nothing too taxing on the brain, and nothing you haven't seen in other old school FPS releases. In early access, you'll encounter 9 different types of enemies, most of which aren't all that intelligent, but rather focus on doing massive damage to your character when they do manage to connect with hits. Yes, just as its predecessor was, Forgive Me Father 2 feels challenging on the normal setting where health drops and ammo supplies aren't always plentiful, but almost a bit too easy when you lower the difficulty. I do believe some further tweaking can be done to find the right mix of challenge, because right now I found myself stuck in a situation where the game was either a bit too hard and frustrating, or maybe just a hair too easy. This wasn't helped by what I presume to be a bug where I would start each new level with no health whatsoever. Upgrading also feels extremely simplistic thus far, with a very simple point spending system, though that isn't really a knock against the game by any means. Personally, I like a simplistic upgrade tree in my games, but your mileage there may vary. Overall, despite some minor nuisances, I think the combat feels really smooth and responsive in Forgive Me Father 2, and the level design remains mostly sound throughout. And speaking of sound, further heightening the combat is a dark metal score, as I was swarmed by hordes of enemies shredding and chugging guitars off and greeted me, building up to a perfect crescendo as I mowed down my final foe. The soundtrack is excellent, accompanied by really nice sound effects, particularly coming from your weaponry. Players will also encounter a madness system, which essentially acts as an additional power-up system of sorts. And that reminds me that nothing is all that well explained in Forgive Me Father 2 in terms of gameplay mechanics, so you will need to fiddle around a bit, though the game is far from complicated to process. Being early access, I suspect many refinements are still being made, and of course that new weapons will be in the works as well. This is good news because all of the weapons currently available are really a blast to use, but all told, Forgive Me Father 2 really feels well polished considering it's an early access release. The game runs beautifully, blazing along at 120 FPS on my PC, and even works on the Steam Deck at 60 FPS with some frame skips here or there. While the Steam Deck version is not fully optimized yet, it's still perfectly playable. Sure, there are some rough patches here or there as you would expect from any early access release, but I for one can't wait for the final product. Even in early access, Forgive Me Father 2 has a good amount of content that makes it a game worth supporting early on.